I'm Emily Colson. 50 years ago, my dad, Chuck Colson, went to prison. This is my story. It wasn't like the prisons you see in the movies with bars on the windows and oversized guards pacing the halls. That would come. This was a room in an old army barracks. A window overlooked the tiny yard below, and the door to the dimly lit hallway remained open. But there was nothing else normal about this place or this moment. It was the only time I was completely alone with my dad when he was in prison. I sat in a hard oak chair. There was nothing else to look at but each other. The previous year had been a whirlwind of people and trials and reporters that surrounded the house. And then it all stopped. Watergate and the men of the Nixon administration was everyone's news. Television stations broadcast the verdict by interrupting their regularly scheduled programming. My dad was sentenced to 1 to 3 years in prison. We sat in my dad's room and looked awkwardly at each other. We tried to make conversation, but I felt hollow and a little achy inside, the way you do when you're getting the flu. Someone walked past our room, but I knew enough not to look. I kept my eyes glued to my dad. And then the intensity of the moment began to press in on us both. "I'm just fine," my dad blurted out. His words were forced and completely out of context. I mean, nothing was fine here, and I hadn't even asked my dad how he was. It wasn't that I didn't care, it's that the weight of this reality was too heavy for either one of us to hold. I was only 15 at the time, with not much wisdom to draw on for a response, so I just stared. My dad's broad shoulders were rounded and his hands slumped between his knees as he sat on the edge of his bed. I'd never seen my dad wear a white t-shirt in the middle of the day. After a moment, he continued to plead his case. "I have everything I need here," he insisted. "See?" He began gesturing around the room. "I have a chair. I have a bed." I couldn't tell if my dad was trying to comfort me or convince himself. And then his voice moved up another octave as he pointed. "I have a desk." I glanced at the almost child-sized desk beside me, its surface carved with years of graffiti, and an image flashed in my mind of the sprawling, highly polished desk in my dad's study back home, now sitting empty. The rest of the world was still spinning outside. Fathers were coming home from work. Families were gathering around dinner tables. But for us, life had stopped. We could not have been more alone than in that moment. But we were not alone. I only understand it looking back. There was someone else with us in that sparse room in Fort Holabird that day, just as there was someone else in the fire with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It was Jesus. He doesn't show up like a hologram or a Star Trek character that's beamed in. He doesn't announce himself with the fanfare of a groom walking into his wedding reception. He's subtle and as present as the air we breathe. Jesus promises he will never leave us or forsake us, even in a prison. But there's something else I now know. Jesus was not bound as we were by the walls of that prison 50 years ago. He was not limited by what we could see or understand in the ache of that moment. He was, at the very same time, both fully present with us then and fully present in the future. He already knew what was to come. It was as if when Jesus sat with us in that cramped room, he had a picture in his wallet of what would be today, 50 years later. He already saw the extraordinary ministries that would arise, Prison Fellowship Ministries and the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. He saw the millions of lives that would be infused with courage and transformed by the hope of the gospel. He already knew my dad would grow to become a mighty man of God, and that even prison was a part of that plan. And he knew that the bond of love between this father and daughter, so alone in that prison, would one day become unbreakable. This is hope. To know, as a dear friend often reminds me, that God is creating a masterpiece with our lives far beyond our momentary circumstances. Today, as I stand 50 years down the road looking back, I am certain of this: the Lord is trustworthy. Jesus is with us. And he still has more pictures in his wallet.